Before I start reading this is called Wrong Again, 50 Years of Failed Eco-Apocalyptic Predictions. I don't see modern climate alarmists as any different than Pat Robertson or any of the televangelists or any of the other soothsayers of doom from the past that constantly get it wrong, but yet are constantly told, they're constantly worshipped by their congregations of people that just wish to die. 1967, they predicted a dire famine. In 1975, didn't happen. 1969, everyone will disappear in a cloud of blue steam. In 1989, okay, the coming ice age by 2000. In 1970, America subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. 1971, new ice age coming. New ice age by 2070. Space satellites show new ice age coming fast. 1974, another ice age. 1974, ozone repletion, a great peril to life, or ozone depletion, a great peril to life. Okay. Global cooling in the 1970s again, 1976. Acid rain kills life in lakes in 1980. 10 years later, the U.S. government program formed to study acid rain, blah, blah, blah. As you can see, these are just bad predictions that didn't come true. Or if they did, it was in far less of a drastic way than people had stated that they would. Okay, rising seas to obliterate nations by 2000. Okay, I remember when I was in elementary school, they said if my parents and I didn't start taking the bus everywhere we went, we'd all be up to our eyeballs and we'd be underwater in Pennsylvania. Didn't happen. Children won't know what snow is. Britain to have Siberian climate by 2020. That's in 2004. Okay, you see that these predictions are all over the place. Al Gore warns of ice-free Arctic by 2013. Okay, Prince Charles says only 8 years to save the planet. UK Prime Minister says 50 days to save the planet from catastrophe. Arctic ice free by 2015, yada 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 yada. So I'm going to get into this a little bit more. So the apocalyptic claims about climate change are obviously wrong. Environmental journalists and advocates in recent years, I don't want to sign up. Okay, they will let me read it, good. Environmental journalists and advocates have in recent years and in recent weeks made a number of apocalyptic predictions about the impact of climate change. Bill McKibben suggested climate-driven fires in Australia have made koalas functionally extinct. Extinction Rebellion said billions will die and life on Earth is dying. Okay. Okay. Sometimes scientists themselves make apocalyptic claims. Okay, sometimes scientists themselves make apocalyptic claims. It's difficult to see how we could accommodate 1 billion people, or even half of that if the Earth warms for 4 degrees, said one earlier this year. The potential for multi-breadbasket failure is increasing, said another. If sea levels rise as much as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts, another scientist said, it will be an unmanageable problem. Apocalyptic statements like these have real-world impacts when you have to hear them from some little autistic girl. Of course they do. They're annoying. In September, a group of British psychologists said children are increasingly suffering from anxiety from the frightening discourse around climate change. In October, an activist with Extinction Rebellion, an environmental group founded in 2018 to commit civil disobedience to draw awareness to the threat its founders and supporters say climate change poses to human existence, and a videographer were kicked and beaten in a London tube station by angry commuters. And last week, an XR co-founder said a genocide like the Holocaust was happening again on a far greater scale and in plain sight from climate change. As you can tell, these are ridiculous claims, and people might think that these are exaggerated claims, but they are not. These are what people claim. These are what so-called scientists claim. These things aren't happening. What always shocks me is how short people's memories are, or how little people pay attention to the news or even the weather or anything, unless it's being spoken about in an alarmist fashion. Last year, a friend of mine, she was freaking out because all the tornadoes we were having in Pennsylvania, not taking into consideration, we have tornadoes every year in Pennsylvania. It's just a common thing that happens in Pennsylvania. People don't talk about it because they're not as destructive as the tornadoes in the Midwest, but we do have tornadoes every year in Pennsylvania. We have heat waves. Okay, we have heat waves every year in Pennsylvania. We always have. Sometimes greater, sometimes not so great. But this is heat waves throughout history. As I said, we have tornadoes every year. We have rain every year. A lot of the flooding in my particular area, the reason we're having flooding is not because it's raining. We've always had rain. It's not raining any more or any less than it has in the past. We do have more rain sometimes and less rain other times, but the problem is our infrastructure is failing because we haven't done anything with our infrastructure really in, I don't know, 100 years in this area. So a lot of the places where the water would usually go, they're clogged up, they're crumbling. You know, a lot of these underground areas that go into the reservoirs and whatnot, they're not in the greatest shape. So this is about heat waves throughout history. Okay, and again, that's why Biden's Build Back Better is important to making our country work properly. The Great New York Heat Wave of 1896. Okay. The North American Heat Wave of 1936. The Chicago Heat Wave of 1995. The European Heat Wave of 2003. Okay? Doesn't go back as far as I might like, but it goes back fairly far. Now, after I start dealing with, climate change and what's going on with, climate change and yada, 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 I'm going to get into the benefits of terraforming, the benefits of living simply, the benefits, the solution is actually similar to what these lunatics are promoting, but the problem is they're promoting it in a way that's lunacy, and what you need to understand is a lot of what they're saying they do not have the evidence for, and I'm going to continue with one of my favorite people on this. His name is Ivar Giaver. This gentleman is a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and I want you to pay special attention to the things that he's saying.
Going to talk about global warming revisited. The reason is revisited, I got introduced to global warming here in Lindau. And I was in a panel discussion in 2008. And it was a panel discussion about global warming. And I didn't really want to participate. But they said you really had to. And so I spent maybe half a day or a day or so looking at Google. And I was horrified by what I found. And so I got interested in global warming a little bit. And because I was on this panel discussion, I looked at Google, and I looked at Gaber and global warming, because I've been on one panel discussion. And I got roughly 40,000 results. If I look at my mind and look at my name and say Gaber and superconductivity, I got much fewer results. Global warming is really a hot topic. And what I said then, and which I still believe, is that global warming really has become a new religion. Believe is that global warming really has become a new religion. It really has become a new religion because you can't discuss it. It's not proper. If you say global, if you look at Linda here today, then all the people who are, notable people, they have said climate change in their talks. All of them have said it. I don't know whether they know what they mean, but they have said it anyway. Everybody talks about climate change. So the American Physical Society, which I was a member, said the evidence is incontrovertible that global warming exists. Now think about that. This is a physical society. This is a physical society. This is a physical society. And they say you cannot discuss global warming. And they say you cannot discuss global warming. And they say you cannot discuss global warming because we believe it's happening. It's like the Catholic Church. It's like the Catholic Church. It's like the Catholic Church. There are lots of incontrovertible truth in the Catholic Church, I'm sure. There are lots of incontrovertible truth in the Catholic Church, There are lots of incontrovertible truth in the Catholic Church, I'm sure. And here there's an incontrovertible truth in the physical society. So the only answer to that is to resign. So I resigned in 1911. And that actually made quite a much more story than I thought it would have. So it really, global warming really starts with these two people, Al Gore and Curry, or however you pronounce it. And what they did, they made this curve popular. I know that's hard to read from the audience, but on the vertical scale is degrees in 0.1 degrees. So roughly one vertical scale is degrees in 0.1 degrees. Vertical scale is degrees in 0.1 degrees. So roughly 1 degree is the whole vertical scale. 1 degree is the whole vertical scale. 1 degree is the whole vertical scale. And the horizontal scales is in years from 1860 to 2000. And you see, the global warming has increased, but the scale is like the dentists use when they advertise by the toothpaste, because the scale is absolutely distorted. I mean, because the scale is absolutely distorted. Because the scale is absolutely distorted. Because the scale is absolutely distorted. I mean, there's 1 degree there. And for what did this curve measure? Well, this curve measures what does the average temperature for the world for a whole year and for a whole Earth for 1 year. So there's the average temperature for the whole Earth for 1 year, and that measures in a fraction of a degree. That measures in a fraction of a degree. That measures in a fraction of a degree. So what did that mean? I think probably nothing. I think probably nothing. I think probably nothing. So let me talk about that again. From 1880 to 2015, the temperature has increased from 288 to 288.8 degree Kelvin. Has increased from 288 to 288.8 degree Kelvin, 0.3%. has increased from 288 to 288.8 degree Kelvin, 0.3%. I think the temperature has been amazingly stable. I think the temperature has been amazingly stable. I think the temperature has been amazingly stable. If I take where I live in Albany, New York, there are roughly 80 degree K difference between summer and winter at some time. And so would you think there are roughly 80 degree K difference between summer and winter at some time. There are roughly 80 degree K difference between summer and winter at some time. And so
it's important to note that when they say 1 degree, they're talking 1 degree Kelvin, not Celsius, not Fahrenheit.
Would you think that 0.8 degree average on the Earth makes any difference to the climate in Albany? Is that sensible to you? Oh, the wrong way. So here is then where the temperature is measured. And you see there's point on the graph, so if you can read that, north of 60 degrees is 167 measurements. Between 30 and 60 degrees is quite a lot of measurements. The United States is all covered with things and stuff. So if you go finally to the South Pole, there are 8 thermometers, according to NASA. That's all they have, including to the South Pole, there are 8 thermometers, according to NASA. That's all they have. To the South Pole, there are 8 thermometers, according to NASA. That's all they have, including the South Pole. 8 thermometers. And so if you had 8 thermometers to measure the average temperature in Germany, where would you put those 8 thermometers? And so if you had 8 thermometers to measure the average temperature in Germany, where would you put those 8 thermometers? And so if you had 8 thermometers to measure the average temperature in Germany, where would you put those 8 thermometers? You know, 8 thermometers for the continent is nothing. And in fact, 8 thermometers for the continent is nothing. 8 thermometers for the continent is nothing. And the fact is, but I deal with the South Pole, there has never been as cold on the South Pole as it is right now. There has never been as cold on the South Pole as it is right now. There has never been as cold on the South Pole as it is right now. There's more ice than there ever have been. And so, but people don't talk about that. But people don't talk about that. They talk about the North Pole, where there's warmer climate at the present time. And the other thing which upset me is that what is the optimum temperature for the Earth? Means that what is the optimum temperature for the Earth? Means that what is the optimum temperature for the Earth? Is that the temperature we have right now? That would be a miracle. That would be a miracle. That would be a miracle. Maybe it's 2 degrees warmer. Maybe it's 2 degrees colder. But nobody has told me what the optimal temperature is for the whole Earth. This is a little bit like American foreign policy. The foreign policy wants things to be as they are because we have it good in the United States. But even the foreign policy can't control the climate. The other thing is that both the alarmists and the deniers, I guess I'm quoted as a denier, measures the average temperature for the whole Earth for a whole year to a fraction of a degree, and year to a fraction of a degree, to a fraction of a degree, and that result is significant. Of course it's not. How can you possibly measure the average temperature for the whole Earth and for the whole year and come up with a fraction of a degree? So I have this slide here. I think the average temperature of the Earth is equal to the emperor's new clothes. Is equal to the emperor's new clothes. Is equal to the emperor's new clothes. Was a boy who said, cried, "It's Mike. The emperor has no clothes on." And I would cry out and say, you can't measure the temperature for the whole Earth at such accuracy. I was in Beijing I think it was in 74, 75, and Beijing was a village. There were 3 or 4 cars there, and we had control of one of them. I was back in Berlin, in Beijing, like a few years ago, and you can't cross the streets for cars. And there's buildings which are like 30, 40 stories high everywhere. And so what had that done with the temperature for Beijing, you think? I mean, and if you think that when you measure temperature to 1900, the thermometer was standing sort of in the countryside, and now we go 1910, the more dense population density, and then the thermometers broke, you got new thermometers, and how can you think that it can measure this to a fraction of a degree? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Now, this is what they have come up with, however, and this is for the last 19 years, roughly speaking. The temperature has not gone up. It's been constant for 19 years. It's been constant for 19 years. It's been constant for 19 years, almost as long as the life of the students here. They're probably at 23, 24 years old. So it hasn't gone up. So it hasn't gone up. So it hasn't gone up. And there was a big peak in 98, that's very recognizable. So what did the people who measured temperature do with that? Well, here is the latest temperature they have measured now, and they see the curve here, and if you look at the edge here, I made a bit better one here. The temperature here goes up. How can that be when I just showed you the other curve, the temperature has been constant? Well, the reason for that is that they include now the ocean. But for 100 years, the ocean has not been included. But for 100 years, the ocean has not been included. But for 100 years, the ocean has not been included. Why do you think they include the ocean? Because it's more accurate, or because they can fiddle with the data? Because it's more accurate, or because they can fiddle with the data? Because it's more accurate, or because they can fiddle with the data? But that's what NASA does. So Obama said last year that but that's what NASA does. But that's what NASA does. So Obama. But that's what NASA does. So Obama said last year that 2014 was the hottest year ever. But it's not true. 2014 was the hottest year ever. But it's not true. 2014 was the hottest year ever. But it's not true. It's not the hottest year. So if you don't believe I'm cheating you, here's some satellite data, and this is the peak in 98, and you see basically the satellite data shows the same thing. The temperature has not increased. The temperature has not increased. The temperature has not increased. So what is then a greenhouse effect? Well, without the atmosphere, the Earth would have been roughly 35 degrees warmer, roughly speaking. Now, from 1898 to 1998, the temperature has increased 0.8 degrees. And the CO2 concentration has increased from 295 to 367, or roughly 72 parts per million. Has increased from 295 to 367, or roughly 72 parts per million in 100 years. That's what has happened. That's the fact. I'm not making this up. Now from 1998, which is basically the hottest year, The CO2 has increased from 367 to 403, roughly 36 parts per million. That's half of the previous increase. 36 parts per million. That's half of the previous increase. 36 parts per million. That's half of the previous increase. So why hasn't the temperature increased 0.4 degrees then? So why hasn't the temperature increased 0.4 degrees then? So why hasn't the temperature increased 0.4 degrees then? I mean, if you're a physicist, for heaven's sake, and here's the experiment, and you have a theory, and the theory doesn't agree with the experiment, then you have to cut out the theory. You were wrong with the theory. And you have a theory, and the theory doesn't agree with the experiment, then you have to cut out the theory. You were wrong with the theory. And you have a theory, and the theory doesn't agree with the experiment, then you have to cut out the theory. You were wrong with the theory. See, that's half the thing. It should have been, but it isn't. So you can't believe then the people who are the alarmists say that CO2 is a terrible thing, and therefore you have to not drive and use solar cells and stuff because otherwise the world will go to pot. But it's not true. To pot. But it's not true. It's to pot. But it's not true. It's absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. So nature, in its wisdom, this was happened actually in 2012 when I gave another talk on global warming here, has come up with a magazine, and they want to cash in on the fad. My friend said I shouldn't make fun of nature because then I won't publish my papers. But I don't publish my papers anyway, so I'm safe there. So they had an article in there, for example, that corn yield in Africa decreased 1% for each day over 30 degree Kelvin. See, that's a very difficult thing to determine. But they published that article anyway. There was nothing saying in nature that in the United States we put 10% alcohol into gasoline. That's the most stupid program America ever done. But all the gasoline should have 10% ethanol in it. And that comes from corn as well, from corn grown in Iowa, I guess. And that's food. So for reason we do this, that food is much more expensive now because we do this. It's very costly and very stupid because we do this. It's very costly and very stupid because we do this. It's very costly and very stupid. But that's what the United States, sometimes the United States do stupid things. And nobody mentioned nature how important the CO2 is for plant growth. If you have more CO2, the plant grows faster. More CO2, the plant grows faster. More CO2, the plant grows faster. People use greenhouses and put CO2 in greenhouses to get a higher yield. People use greenhouses and put CO2 in greenhouses to get a higher yield. People use greenhouses and put CO2 in greenhouses to get a higher yield. But now, since the CO2 has increased, we get more plant and more grows faster. It's a wonderful thing, but they don't talk about that in nature. And also, nobody says big trees here in Lindau, for example, the beautiful trees are actually starving. But when a plant developed photosynthesis, there was much more carbon dioxide in the air. And so they could use much more, but there isn't any. So the plants are really starving. But they don't talk about how good it is for agriculture that CO2 is increasing. It's for agriculture that CO2 is increasing. It's for agriculture that CO2 is increasing. Here's another thing from nature, which just to show you how ridiculous things are. There's a guy here says, or a guy, a girl, I don't know, that the shrinking victims because of global warming is cotton, corn, strawberries, etc. These are things that get smaller because of global warming. So I read out strawberries here because they grow strawberries in Italy, and they grow strawberries in Norway. I never seen any difference in the size of the strawberries grown in Italy and Norway, but apparently they are. And if you're going to make a statement on that, how many strawberries has to count and weigh and deal with? See, it's ridiculous. And then it says here, herring is also smaller. But we've catch a lot of herring in Norway. I never heard anybody say that. But they claim that all these things, lynx, wood rats, pearls, shrimp, scallop, cotton, corn, everything gets smaller because of global warming. Published in Nature. So unfortunately, it is not true for people. So unfortunately, it is not true for people. So unfortunately, it is not true for people. So that's so here's another one. Here's see, all this you can do, which I did when I went on that panel discussion. Here they say melting Greenland. And you look at that picture, it's carefully done, some people standing in the ice, and a river flowing off, and you think Greenland will disappear. But the information on the internet, which is wonderful, and I looked it up, there are 4 harbors in Greenland. And this is the name of the harbors. I won't pronounce them, but you see the coldest years include 1992, 1997, and so on. But you see the coldest years include 1992, 1997, and so on. But you see the coldest years include 1992, 1997, and so on. The one on the here are the coldest years. Which year basically the 1930, and those are the. And here are the warmest years. And so the warmest years basically the 1930, and here are the warmest years. And so the warmest years basically the 1930. And those are the facts. Those are the temperature the people in the harbors in Greenland has measured over the years. And it doesn't look like it's getting any warmer. I mean, I don't understand it. Where does the data come from? Who says? Where does the data come from? Where does the data come from? Who says what it says? Now, of course, global warming is supposed to cause the climate change. That's what it was. But the climate changes anyway. The climate changes anyway. The climate changes anyway. The climate has always changed. But the people who believe in global warming say the reason climate changes is because of global warming. And the World Meteorological Organization said you need 30 years to determine the climate. So this is a difficult slide to see here, but this is the rainfall in lots of places all over the world. But if we focus on this one here, this is the Dust Bowl in the Midwest in the 30s. Focus on this one here, this is the Dust Bowl in the Midwest in the 30s. On this one here, this is the Dust Bowl in the Midwest in the 30s.
I think you get the idea. The truth is, the data that they're claiming is there is not there. And I strongly encourage people to watch this video on their own. I'm going to call that a day for this video, and I'll continue tomorrow or maybe the next day with another video on this same topic. I will be getting into the problems with pollution and why pollution is a bad thing. But what my point is you have to look at what's being said and why is it being said and who's saying it and where is it coming from. And that's all for this video.